Kaelen Vance was not an explorer, not by the traditional definition. He was a philosopher of the dark, a seeker of truth where the sun never reached. At 27, he carried not only a heavy backpack laden with rope and gear but also the weight of a caustic doctrine of existence, a theory forged in the primal terrors of his childhood. Kaelen's early years were not defined by cozy camping trips beneath starlight. They were hours of tense, sweaty labor and fear in the abandoned ore mines of rural Pennsylvania. His father, a veteran miner with calloused hands and a will of steel, taught him lessons about pressure and collapse. His father saw the Earth's crust not as inanimate matter, but as a patient predator, always waiting for the moment of human vulnerability. It was there Kaelen learned that gravity was not a scientific constant. It was a pending judgment. The damp smell of rock, the strange shift of moving stone, and the cold metallic feel of the shovel in his hand became his native tongue. Now, Kaelen dedicated his life to the Onyx Abyss, a massive, complex karst system covering an area so vast that satellite mapping only captured a fraction of its true extent. The Onyx Abyss was unlike any federally protected national cave. It was privately owned, completely isolated from federal regulatory agencies, turning it into a zone of absolute freedom where profit superseded safety, and danger had reached a primordial level. The Onyx Abyss was a maze that breathed. It was not merely a static structure. Geological shifts, toxic gas leaks, and tremendous collapses could occur at any moment without warning. One week, a corridor might be a safe path. The next, it would have transformed into a methane chamber or a swallowing pit. For scientists, Onyx was a goldmine of data. For Kaelen, it was a battlefield of survival. Kaelen took on mapping, guiding, and rescue missions in the most perilous zones, places where standard rescue teams refused to set foot. He wasn't just the best. He was the only one who accepted the geological impossibilities. Every theory he learned in college, about the stability of rock arches, about the slow movement of strata, became meaningless when faced with the strange and ancient realities existing deep below. He had witnessed chambers spontaneously form in weeks, groundwater streams illogically reroute, and rock types that seemed to defy every physical law of durability. The Onyx Abyss contained not only valuable minerals, it held biological and supernatural secrets buried since the world was young, waiting to emerge or swallow those who dared trespass. It was in this chaotic environment that Kaelen developed his own doctrine of survival. In eternal darkness, the enemy can be anything. The enemy need not have fangs or claws. It might be a subtle, undetectable shift in pressure, an invisible layer of ice masking a deep chasm, or a silent current of carbon dioxide slowly replacing oxygen. For Kaelen, the most crucial tool was not a tens of thousands of dollars seismic scanner or a precise laser GPS. The most important tool was heightened intuition, a raw sense honed by experience, which allowed him to read the mood of the surrounding rock mass. When his headlamp couldn't penetrate the haze of a gas chamber, Kaelen relied on the perceived humidity, the smell of the stone. Was it sulfur, metal, or the sweet odor of poisonous gas? And most critically, the minute vibration transmitted through the soles of his boots. This intuition was often scorned by the scientific community, yet it had saved Kaelen's life dozens of times. Kaelen understood that the Onyx Abyss was a living entity. To survive, he had to respect it as an equal adversary, even a god of chaos. He accepted the existence of the supernatural and of creatures unknown to science, because denial in the darkness was nothing short of voluntary suicide. If a geologist saw only minerals and structures, Kaelen saw a ceaseless struggle for survival where he was merely a fragile visitor. His doctrine revolved around a simple yet brutal ethical principle. Human survival takes precedence over everything else, including data, minerals, and scientific reputation. He would not hesitate to destroy a geological masterpiece to save a life, or permanently seal a corridor if he sensed something too aggressive lurking within. And as Kaelen strapped on his heavy pack, double-checked his spare oxygen tank, and switched on his lamp, he always reminded himself of one phrase: "Science can explain what exists on the surface. Down here, there is only truth." He was preparing for a new mapping mission, deeper than anything he had attempted, leading into a zone where previous explorers only managed to transmit screams before the line went dead. Kaelen felt the terrifying silence of the rock mass, a silence too perfect, signaling an impending catastrophe or the emergence of something beyond human comprehension. He was ready to listen, not with his ears, but with his soul. In 2009, the Onyx Abyss taught Kaelen his first lesson about prioritizing life over science, a painful lesson inscribed with fear and C4 explosives. Kaelen was 22 then, still heavily weighed down by the idea of data preservation. During a routine mapping mission in a newly discovered corridor, a severe landslide occurred. Sudden earth pressure caused a large rock dome to collapse, burying and trapping Jonas, his trusted partner, deep within a compressed air chamber. Unable to reach Jonas from the initial direction because the collapse had created an impassable stone wall, Kaelen was forced to find an alternate route. He discovered a narrow, wet and muddy fissure corridor, just wide enough for one person to crawl through, leading into a deeper, previously unexplored area. Kaelen knew entering unmapped territory was extremely dangerous, but he had no other choice. As he crawled through the crack, his headlamp beam swept across the stone floor, and he noticed a trace. It was a slick, wet trail, not caused by water or mud, but carrying a strange organic texture, leading deeper into the darkness. The air's scent abruptly changed. No longer the smell of fresh earth or sulfur, but the pungent, acrid smell of fresh blood and rotting flesh. That trail led Kaelen to a larger chamber, where the air was thick with the scent of death. The light of his headlamp wavered over the glistening stalactite walls, and Kaelen saw it. It was the Troglodyte. The creature stood nearly 2 handspans taller than Kaelen, about 2 meters. Horrifyingly gaunt, as if made of bone and sinew, covered in pallid, white skin that looked as though it hadn't seen sunlight in millions of years. The most terrifying detail was its eyes. They had no pupils, just 2 deep sockets emitting a deep red glow, reflecting Kaelen's light. The Troglodyte was dragging the carcass of a mountain goat, freshly caught from above ground, its sharp teeth stained with blood. When Kaelen shone the light, the Troglodyte neither flinched nor fled. It paused, slowly turned its head, and emitted a throaty, profound growl that was an absolute challenge. Kaelen realized he was facing an apex predator, a creature that had evolved to dominate this darkness. This was not just wildlife. This was a constant threat to anyone daring to penetrate the deeper levels. Kaelen had only seconds to act. He knew that attempting to study or even evade the creature was simply irresponsible. If the Troglodyte found its way into frequently traveled corridors, any expedition team would be in danger. To ensure Jonas's safety and eliminate this threat, Kaelen made a brutal and decisive choice. He activated a small amount of the C4 explosive he carried, which was normally reserved for creating escape routes. The explosion didn't just create a temporary exit on the other side of the stone wall, giving Jonas a chance to escape safely when the rescue team arrived. More importantly, it collapsed and permanently sealed the entrance to the Troglodyte's area. Kaelen had sacrificed countless pieces of valuable geological data, perhaps the evidence of a previously unknown ecosystem, solely to eliminate a biological threat. The scientific community would later call the action irreparable data sabotage, a lack of professionalism. But for Kaelen, it was survival. The lesson was etched into his memory. Science serves life, not the other way around. The Troglodyte was sealed away, and Kaelen became a man of the shadows, ready to make absolute decisions for the sake of safety. If the Troglodyte was a tangible horror, a flesh and blood predator, then the bone stripper was the horror of sophistication, an embodiment of coldness and speed. This incident occurred during Kaelen's internship and fundamentally reshaped his respect for the power of underground water. Kaelen's team was surveying the lower levels, where swift subterranean rivers formed a complex network. They were forced to cross an underground river about 10 meters wide, the water chilling to the bone. Their instructor at the time was Silas, an arrogant guide notorious for disregarding environmental dangers. Silas trusted speed and physical strength more than caution. Silas insisted they cross at the strongest eddy, a deep, swirling, dangerous section, to save significant time. Kaelen tried to warn them about the unstable currents, but Silas ignored him, mocking Kaelen as a boy afraid of cold water. Silas led the way, wading into the center of the strongest current. He suddenly stopped. Instead of his usual grunt of cold or curse, he emitted a chilling, utterly non-human scream, a sound purely of unnameable terror and pain, before being violently dragged underwater by some unseen force. Kaelen's panicked team struggled for several minutes in the icy water before managing to pull Silas onto a small nearby sandbank. The sight at that moment was deeply imprinted on Kaelen's mind, becoming his most terrifying memory of the precision of death beneath the earth. Silas's feet and lower calves were completely gone. The skin, muscle, tendons, and even the thick padding of his specialized boots had been perfectly excised, sharp and horrifically precise. The cut was not rough or torn, as if bitten by animal teeth or jagged rocks. It was a high-speed, surgical slice, incredibly quick and accurate. Only the pristine white shin bones remained. Silas, unable to withstand the shock and catastrophic blood loss, died within minutes. Kaelen later named the entity the bone stripper. He believed it was an aquatic predator, perhaps a type of invertebrate or colossal insect evolved to live in the frigid water, using a form of suction mechanism or biological blade with unbelievable reaction speed. More importantly, it taught Kaelen that the subterranean current was not just a geological obstacle or an environment. It was a living entity, a cold, efficient killer. Since then, Kaelen never took any underground flow lightly. He always used highly detailed thermal and pressure sensing equipment before deciding to cross water. The bone stripper had etched a deadly respect for the precision of darkness into Kaelen's soul. In the Onyx Abyss, not everything supernatural brought horror or death. This truth was demonstrated in the story of Old Man Dagger. The incident occurred during a high-pressure rescue mission. Kaelen had to search for Alara, the daughter of an influential benefactor, who was lost near an unstable geothermal hot spring, an area notorious for easy collapse and frequent toxic gas leaks. When Kaelen found Alara, she was shivering from hypothermia in a small fissure but was strangely lucid. Alara recounted a story that Kaelen, with his experience, could not dismiss. An old man, heavily bearded, wearing an old, ragged coat, and possessing eyes burning like embers, had found her and directed her to the safe spot just before the collapse occurred. Kaelen immediately recognized the description. It was Old Man Dagger. Dagger was not a troglodyte or a bone stripper. He was a former mine foreman who had died decades earlier trying to rescue his son from a collapse caused by gas. Dagger was not a creature of the cave. He was a spirit known to protect those lost in the dangerous old mine sections. Old explorers often recounted that Dagger always carried the faint smell of sulfur and old explosives. Kaelen, who had accepted the existence of the troglodyte and the bone stripper, easily accepted Dagger's existence. Dagger's intervention allowed Kaelen to successfully rescue Alara without having to venture into the highly unstable area, while also avoiding a gas storm that nearly collapsed the escape route. Dagger had created an invisible covenant. He protected the lost, and in return he required respect. In response to this favor and to maintain the truce between the living world and the unseen rules of the darkness, Kaelen established a ritual. Whenever he worked near the old, collapsed mine shaft, he frequently left a bottle of expensive bourbon and a pack of heavy cigarettes nearby. It was an homage to the silent guardians of the Onyx Abyss, an unspoken covenant that Kaelen understood and respected their boundaries. These terrifying and supernatural experiences did not cause Kaelen Vance to quit. Conversely, they sharpened him into an indispensable specialist. His handling of the Troglodyte threat with C4, his deadly respect for the Bone Stripper, and his spiritual acceptance of Dagger proved Kaelen was the only person capable of making the hardest decisions in the Onyx Abyss. The benefactors and owners of the Onyx Abyss recognized that Kaelen was not just a skilled explorer but a radical risk manager. Kaelen Vance was promoted to senior field advisor, a position requiring him to decide when to sacrifice scientific data, when to permanently seal a corridor and mask the true reason, and when to listen to stories of unseen friends to ensure safety. Kaelen accepted the post along with the harsh truth that the world beneath the surface could not be explained by any textbook. For him, every day was a battle against darkness, insanity, and primordial life forms. He became the gatekeeper, holding the secrets of the deep earth away from the dangerous curiosity of the outside world. But the greatest reward after those hours of battle was not salary or praise. It was the moment he crawled out of the cave entrance, his headlamp extinguished, and gazed up at the night sky. After being immersed in absolute darkness, his eyes readjusted, and the brilliant Milky Way revealed itself in the heavens. It was a reminder that although the Onyx Abyss was a dark hell full of primordial horrors, a vast, cold, yet spectacular universe waited above ground. In that moment, facing the immensity of the cosmos, Kaelen's survival felt worthy. He breathed deeply, carrying the scent of damp earth, rock, and old explosives, and prepared for the next day sinking deep into the dark truth. Kaelen Vance's promoted life was less about personal exploration and more about risk management and diplomacy, with the elite class eager to exploit the Onyx Abyss. The Troglodyte and Bone Stripper incidents had put local scientists on edge, but they only fueled the curiosity of high-tier investors who saw in Onyx not survival, but untapped profit. This led to the Artemis Initiative, a deep drilling project funded by a major oil and minerals conglomerate, searching for rare earth deposits at previously unattained depths. Kaelen was assigned as a field consultant, not the leader. The leader was Dr. Elias Thorne, a 50-year-old geophysicist from Caltech, who scorned any theory that could not be quantified by machine. Thorne, immaculate in his newly issued environmental suit and radiating bluster, dismissed Kaelen's hard-won experience with a wave of his hand. "Vance," Thorne said, adjusting his protective goggles, his voice echoing in the airlock chamber. "We reviewed your reports on the 2009 incident. Biology and psychic sounds are not data. We are here to map tectonic fluxes and crystalline structure, not track the roar of goats. Data is paramount. You can concern yourself with keeping people breathing. The rest is our concern." Kaelen merely nodded. He knew Thorne wasn't the enemy. He was just a man who hadn't learned respect yet. The enemy was the Abyss, and Thorne was leading his team of 8 eager young scientists straight into its maw. Their objective was the Sentinel Pit, a vertical shaft plunging over 4,000 meters, believed to access a stable tectonic area where seismic drills had recorded anomalous mineral density. Kaelen tried to warn them about the high methane pressure at that depth, but Thorne merely laughed, pointing to his new multigas analyzer. 6 days after descending into the Sentinel Pit, Thorne's team established base camp at roughly 4,200 meters. Everything went smoothly until they activated the drill head. Immediately, the equipment began to malfunction. It wasn't a physical fault. It was silence. The electromagnetic scanners ceased registering the magnetic field. Radios only emitted high-frequency static, followed by a suffocating quiet. Kaelen, monitoring his personal sensors, noted the inexplicable. Within a 20-meter radius of the drilling area, no sound was being transmitted beyond direct bodily noise. It wasn't a vacuum. It was active sound absorption. A silence so profound it swallowed footsteps and ragged breathing. This is an electromagnetic fault. Nothing more? Thorn growled, punching his tablet screen. The seismic data is showing a massive chamber structure ahead, definite mineral load. We proceed. Kaelen felt a chill crawl up his spine. The silence was not total. It had a strange, continuous undertone only he could perceive. A low hum not of machinery, but of something being held back in the air. He raised a hand to his ear and realized it. The Onyx Abyss had revealed a new, far more sophisticated predatory method than the fangs of a Troglodyte: sensory manipulation. Kaelen tried to stop Thorn. "Doctor, we need to retreat. Our safety equipment is being neutralized. This isn't poison gas, but it is altering how our brains process information. We cannot trust anything we hear or feel." Thorn, enraged at the challenge, ignored Kaelen. He ordered 2 team members, Davis and Chun, to proceed into the mineral chamber. Davis and Chun advanced into the resonant chamber, a massive spherical cavern with huge quartz crystals sprouting from the ceiling and floor. This structure appeared to be the source of the unnatural silence. Kaelen watched through their helmet cameras. For the first moment they were fine. Then the resonant chamber began its work. Chun was the first. He clapped his hands over his head, shaking violently. Over the mic, Kaelen heard the hiss of distortion instead of Chen's voice. "I can't hear my own voice," Chun screamed, though Kaelen only received static hiss. I hear running water in reverse." Davis began to lose his orientation too. He backed away, his headlamp shining on a glittering quartz mass. "It's watching us?" Davis whispered, his voice suddenly dropping to an impossibly low register, almost a subterranean growl over the mic, even though his face was clearly mouthing a whisper. "It's listening to our thoughts." Kaelen recognized the threat. This entity wasn't just absorbing sound, it was regenerating and distorting frequencies, generating auditory hallucinations and inducing a potent form of sensory disorder, perhaps a form of infrasound amplified by the natural quartz crystals. It was a compulsion, forcing humans to believe that something was happening even when nothing was. Kaelen mentally named it the sonic leech. The distortion quickly turned violent. Davis, wholly convinced Chun was plotting against him, drew his survival knife and lunged at his partner. Chen's scream, twisted into a bizarre, wet gurgle over the mic, ripped through Kaelen's headset. Thorn was paralyzed in a fit of panicked disbelief, watching his men tear each other apart. "The data," Thorn stammered. "We must secure the core sample. That structure. It's proof of what we're looking for." Kaelen had no time left for arguments. He knew survival lay not in analyzing this thing, but in eradicating access to it. The threat was not death by cave-in or dismemberment, but death by one's own insanity. He lunged past Thorn, ripping the drill head and seismograph remote controls away. He quickly armed 2 blocks of plastic explosives, designed for localized collapse, into natural fissures near the chamber entrance. Thorn grabbed Kaelen's arm. "What are you doing? That's billions of dollars of investment. My data. You cannot sabotage a scientific discovery. Survival is the only science here," Kaelen roared, his voice echoing strangely in the static-filled airlock. "Look at them, Thorn. They are killing each other. This is not a place for research. This is quarantine." Kaelen triggered the explosives. A brief, sharp shriek, the feeling of the very air being torn apart, followed by the deafening roar of cracking rock. The massive quartz structure in the resonant chamber shattered, collapsing the ceiling and permanently sealing the entrance. Kaelen had successfully placed an unbreachable wall of stone between his team and the sonic leech, sacrificing countless mineral samples and precious geological data. When Kaelen pulled the survivors out of the Onyx Abyss, including Davis and Chen, wounded but returned to sanity and horrified by their own actions, Thorn immediately demanded his termination. He destroyed absolute proof of a unique tectonic structure, Thorn yelled during the safety review meeting topside. He made an emotional decision, based on intuition rather than hard data. I will sue him and this corporation. Kaelen, showered of the deep earth grime and now in clean clothes, faced the investment committee calmly. I saved 6 lives, Kaelen said, his voice level but firm. Had I not, Dr. Thorn would have brought seismic samples and possibly a new kind of psychiatric disorder out of the abyss. The point is not whether the sonic leech exists, but that it altered human behavior and compelled self-destruction. Thorn went down into hell looking for gold, and he found what hell sent back. He pointed to the electromagnetic charts he had managed to record just before the detonation. These numbers are not noise. They are the environment's reaction to our intrusion. The Onyx Abyss is not a lab. It is a living entity, and it will test anyone who thinks they can exploit it without honoring its rules. The committee, swayed by Thorn's influence and the massive financial loss, suspended Kaelen without pay for 6 months. Yet Kaelen felt no defeat. He had succeeded in preserving the Abyss's secret and ensuring survival. During his suspension, Kaelen spent his evenings sitting near the mouth of the cavern, where he sometimes left a measure of bourbon for Old Man Dagger. He looked up at the stars, recognizing the parallel between the darkness of infinite space and the darkness of the deep earth. Both held mysteries beyond human capacity for understanding. For Kaelen, the goal was not to explain the dark, but to accept it, understanding that in the eternal shadow, survival was not a right, but an action executed through painful choices. His philosophy was now complete. Survival secured by the destruction of data is preferable to madness purchased for the sake of truth. When his hiatus ended, Kaelen returned to Onyx, ready for whatever lessons the darkness would bring next. Kaelen Vance was more than an explorer. He was a philosopher of the dark. His childhood was not spent in gentle campgrounds, but in arduous hours working the derelict mines alongside his stern father, where he learned that the Earth's crust was not inanimate matter, but a patient predator. Now, at 27, he dedicated his life to the Onyx Abyss, a colossal, complex karst system, privately owned and completely isolated from governmental oversight. This place was a constantly breathing labyrinth where collapses, gas leaks, and seismic shifts happened without warning. Kaelen undertook mapping, guiding, and rescue missions in its most perilous sectors, asserting that every geological theory he had ever studied disintegrated when confronted with the bizarre primal realities existing deep within. The Onyx Abyss contained not only minerals, but biological and supernatural secrets buried since the world was young. For Kaelen, the most vital tool was not the seismic scanner but raw intuition, because in the eternal darkness, the enemy could be anything, from a simple pressure change to a creature unknown to science. In 2009, during a routine mapping assignment in a newly discovered corridor, the Onyx Abyss delivered Kaelen his first profound lesson about prioritizing life over science. A violent collapse had buried and trapped his partner, Jonas, deep inside a gas pocket. Unable to rescue Jonas from their original position, Kaelen was forced to crawl through a narrow, damp fissure, leading into a deeper, previously uninvestigated sector. Here, he discovered a slick, moist trail on the rock floor, which guided him to a larger chamber where the air hung heavy with the smell of fresh blood. This was where he encountered the Troglodyte. The creature stood nearly 2 feet taller than Kaelen, horrifyingly emaciated. Its skin pallid as if it had never known sunlight, and, most terrifyingly, its pupil-less red eyes reflected Kaelen's headlamp. It was dragging the carcass of a mountain goat, recently snatched from the surface. When Kaelen shone his light, the Troglodyte did not flee. It paused, slowly turned its head, and challenged him with a throaty snarl. Kaelen understood he was facing an apex subterranean predator. To ensure Jonas's safety and eliminate this threat from frequently traveled corridors, Kaelen made a brutal decision. He detonated a small amount of the C4 explosive he carried. The blast not only created a temporary escape route for Jonas, but also permanently collapsed and sealed the entrance to the Troglodyte's area. He sacrificed countless hours of valuable geological data simply to eliminate a biological threat, an act that the scientific community would call vandalism, but which Kaelen recognized as pure survival. If the Troglodyte was palpable horror, manageable with explosives and geology, the bone stripper was the horror of sophistication, proof that the most dangerous aspect of the Onyx Abyss lay in the cold, unpredictable nature of its underground ecosystems. This event occurred during Kaelen's early years of deep exploration, when he was still an inexperienced intern, full of respect for geology but not yet fully acquainted with biological savagery. His team was led by Silas Thorne, a technically experienced guide afflicted by a fatal disease, environmental arrogance. Silas always dismissed warnings about biological hazards or toxic gases as rookie lore, relying too heavily on outdated charts and maps, and scorning the abyss's continuous geological changes. Their objective was to reach a rare quartz seam located across a major subterranean river, which the exploration team called the Styx Channel. This was no minor underground stream. It was a major vein of the abyss, a torrent roughly 10 meters wide, flowing with terrifying speed, dragging along large boulders and generating a deafening roar that echoed through the rock chamber. The water was chilling enough to induce instant hypothermia, and it was utterly black, absorbing lamplight after only a few inches. Silas insisted that backtracking to find a dry route was a waste of time and fuel, despite a local miner's warning that the area was notorious for things that do not like to be disturbed. Silas determined they would cross the river at its narrowest point, where the current was still swirling with near-absurd force. "Everyone, harness up, secure your anchors," Silas commanded, his voice filled with defiance. "Don't fear the water. It's just moving H2O. Kaelen felt a coldness that transcended the ambient temperature, only about 4 degrees Celsius. It was a profound sense of foreboding. He had learned that in the Onyx, the most dangerous things were silence, or, in this case, a deafening roar. As he looked down at the dark, rushing water beneath his headlamp, he sensed the water was not a physical barrier, but a giant, breathing entity. Silas, to prove his bravado, was the first to step in. He was equipped with specialized, steel-padded waders and thick waterproof outerwear. Each step was a struggle against the current, which Kaelen estimated exerted hundreds of kilograms of force. When Silas was halfway across, balanced precariously on a submerged, hidden rock, the horror struck. Came without warning. There was no snarl, no massive impact, no dramatic splash. There was only an extremely subtle shift in Silas's posture. He was stepping, and then suddenly he stopped. His body went rigid, his headlamp fixed on the churning water. Then came the scream. It was a sound Kaelen would carry for the rest of his life. Not a moan of pain, but a ghastly, utterly inhuman shriek combining absolute terror and agonizing surprise. In the next instant, an invisible, powerful force yanked Silas underwater. His safety line went taut and screamed as the rest of the team, including Kaelen, strained with all their might to hold the anchor firm. After several horrific minutes of struggle, beneath the deafening roar of the Styx channel, they managed to haul Silas back onto the narrow, wet bank. The sight that met them instantly shattered all of Kaelen's notions of safety and geological knowledge. Silas lay face down on the rock, gasping. When Kaelen and the third teammate turned him over, they saw the unbelievable. Silas's lower half, from mid-knee downward, was gone. His feet, lower shins, skin, muscle tissue, ligaments, and even the thick protective padding of the specialized waders, all had been perfectly excised. There were no jagged tears, no shredded edges suggesting sharp rock or brute force collision. Instead, the white stubble of his remaining shin bones protruded cleanly, sharply, as if they had been handled by a laser scalpel. His knees and upper thighs were completely untouched, like a statue precisely severed by an invisible surgical blade. Silas, in shock and catastrophic blood loss, only managed to utter a single word before passing out. Fast! Too fast! He died of shock and hypothermia minutes later. There was no rational explanation. A creature capable of generating that kind of cut must move at impossible speeds, utilizing a biological mechanism far outside the knowledge of any known surface aquatic predator. It did not bite or tear. It had stripped the soft tissue and protective material in an instant, an act of impossibly efficient biological cleanup. Kaelen later dubbed the entity the Bone Stripper. This was not a blindly aggressive creature like the Troglodyte. This was a cold, precise, and efficient assassin. It viewed humans and their complex protective layers as merely organic material to be removed. The Silas incident left a deep psychological scar on Kaelen. It forced him to redefine his survival philosophy. If the solution for the Troglodyte was force and isolation, the solution for the Bone Stripper was absolute respect. Kaelen understood that the Styx Channel was not just a river. It was the territory of a sophisticated, high-speed entity. Since that day, Kaelen never viewed subterranean water as a simple geological obstacle. It was a kill zone, a patient and effective predator. In subsequent missions, Kaelen always ensured his team avoided any swiftly moving underground water. Better to spend hours backtracking for a dry path than risk a single step into the Bone Stripper's hunting grounds. Silas's lesson was the price of arrogance, and Kaelen vowed never to make that mistake again. He accepted that in the Onyx Abyss, some forces could not be defeated or mapped. They could only be respected and avoided. Not everything supernatural in the Onyx Abyss brought horror. This truth was proven during a high-stakes rescue mission when Kaelen needed to locate Alara, the daughter of an influential benefactor, who was lost near an unstable geothermal hot spring, an area prone to collapse and gas leaks. Kaelen found the girl in a small fissure, shivering from hypothermia but strangely lucid. Alara recounted that an elderly, bearded man, wearing a tattered coat and possessing eyes like red embers, had found her and directed her to the safe spot. Kaelen immediately recognized the description. It was Old Man Dagger, a former mine foreman who had died decades prior attempting to save his son from a gas-induced cave-in. Dagger was not a cave creature. He was a spirit known to protect the lost in the dangerous old mine sectors, always trailing the scent of sulfur and old dynamite. Kaelen, who had already accepted the existence of the Troglodyte and the Bone Stripper, easily accepted the existence of Dagger. Dagger's intervention allowed Kaelen to successfully rescue Alara without having to risk the collapsing area. In return for this grace, Kaelen established a ritual. Whenever he worked near the collapsed mine shaft, he routinely left a bottle of expensive bourbon and a pack of heavy cigarettes nearby. It was an unspoken pact, a sign of respect for the invisible rules of the Onyx Abyss. These terrifying and supernatural experiences did not deter Kaelen. Conversely, they sharpened him into an indispensable expert. His handling of the Troglodyte threat, His deadly respect for the bone stripper, and his pragmatic acceptance of Dagger proved Kaelen was the only person competent enough to make the toughest calls. Kaelen Vance was promoted to senior field consultant, a position requiring him to decide when to sacrifice scientific data, when to permanently seal off a corridor, and when to heed a story about invisible friends to ensure safety. He accepted the post along with the truth that the subterranean world could not be explained by any textbook. For Kaelen, every day was a battle against darkness, insanity, and primordial life forms. But the greatest reward after those hours of conflict was not the salary or the praise. It was the moment he crawled out over the cave threshold, turned off his headlamp, and gazed upon the night sky. After immersion in absolute darkness, the brilliant Milky Way would spread above him, a chilling reminder that while the Onyx Abyss was hell, a vast, cold, yet luminous universe awaited on the surface. Kaelen Vance was not merely an explorer. He was a philosopher of darkness. His childhood wasn't spent on gentle camping trips but in grueling hours within abandoned mines alongside his harsh father, where he learned the Earth's crust was not inanimate matter but a patient predator. Now, at 27, he devoted his life to the Onyx Abyss, a vast, intricate karst system, privately owned and completely isolated from governmental oversight. This place was a constantly breathing labyrinth where collapses, toxic gas leaks, and geological shifts occurred without warning. Kaelen handled guiding, mapping, and rescue missions in the most dangerous sectors, insisting that every geological theory he had studied became meaningless when confronted with the bizarre and primal things existing deep below. The Onyx Abyss contained more than just minerals. It held biological and supernatural secrets buried since the world was young. For Kaelen, the most crucial tool wasn't the seismic scanner, but raw, heightened intuition, because in the eternal blackness, the enemy could be anything, from a simple change in air pressure to a creature unknown to science. In 2009, during a routine mapping mission in a newly discovered corridor, the Onyx Abyss taught Kaelen its first crucial lesson: prioritize life over data. A violent rockfall buried and trapped his partner, Jonas, deep within a gas pocket. Unable to reach Jonas from the initial direction, Kaelen was forced to belly crawl through a narrow, slick fissure, leading into a deeper, previously uncharted sector. Here, he discovered a wet, viscous trail on the stone floor, which led him to a larger chamber where the air hung heavy with the smell of fresh blood. That was where he met the Troglodyte. The creature stood nearly 2 spans taller than Kaelen, horrifyingly gaunt. Its skin pale as though it had never touched sunlight, and most terrifyingly, its red, pupil-less eyes reflected Kaelen's headlamp. It was dragging the carcass of a recently caught mountain goat down from the surface. When Kaelen shone his light, the Troglodyte did not flee. It paused, turned its head slowly, and challenged him with a throaty, rasping roar. Kaelen understood he was facing a subterranean apex predator. To ensure Jonas's safety and eliminate this threat from the frequently traveled corridors, Kaelen made a brutal decision. He triggered a small charge of C4 he carried. The blast not only created a temporary escape route for Jonas, but also permanently collapsed and sealed the entrance to the Troglodyte's domain. He sacrificed invaluable geological data simply to eliminate a biological threat, an action the scientific community would call sabotage, but to Kaelen it was pure survival. If the Troglodyte was a tangible horror, the bone stripper was the horror of sophistication. This event occurred when Kaelen was an intern, forced to cross a frigid, swift-flowing underground river under the command of Silas, an arrogant guide who scorned the environment's inherent dangers. Silas insisted they traverse the whirlpool section to save time. As Silas waded halfway through the strongest current, he abruptly stopped. Instead of a cry of cold, he emitted a jarring, utterly inhuman shriek, before an invisible force violently yanked him beneath the water. Kaelen's panicked team struggled for several minutes, managing to haul Silas onto a small sandy bank. The sight that followed was permanently etched into Kaelen's memory. Silas's feet and lower shins were completely gone. The skin, muscle, ligaments, and even the thick padding of his specialized boots had been perfectly stripped away, cleanly, as though not by teeth or jagged rocks, but by an impossibly fast surgical blade. Only the white, polished tibia bones remained. Silas died of shock and blood loss moments later. Kaelen later dubbed the entity the Bone Stripper, a deep-water predator of terrifying speed and precision. This incident forced Kaelen to forever respect the subterranean water, not merely as a geological obstacle, but as a living entity, a cold, efficient killer. If the Troglodyte represented the brutality of biology, and the Bone Stripper the cruelty of nature, then Old Man Dagger taught Kaelen that the Onyx Abyss also contained a kind of morality, a benign, supernatural intervention. This lesson arrived during the most critical rescue mission of his career, pressured not just by time but by the elite. Alara Hayes, the daughter of one of Onyx's largest excavation investors, was lost. She wasn't missing in the common limestone corridors, but in the abandoned old mine shaft near the Wailing Hot Springs, an unstable geothermal area known for a double threat: water temperatures reaching 90 degrees Celsius, corrosive acidic steam, and persistent hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide leaks. This was the same area where, 50 years prior, a gas explosion tragedy had claimed Elias Old Man Dagger, a former mine foreman, as he attempted to rescue his own son. Kaelen led the search team. He knew that with every minute in that zone, the probability of Alara succumbing to gas poisoning or a collapse increased exponentially. Donning specialized respirators, he crawled through constricted passages where the heat condensed his breath. His seismometer screamed constantly, warning of pockets of steam seeking release. The air reeked strongly of sulfur and burning, moist earth. He found Alara after nearly 7 hours of frantic searching. She was huddled in a small fissure, strangely sheltered from the most dangerous plumes of hot vapor and toxic gas leaks. Astoundingly, Alara, though severely hypothermic, was conscious and completely unaffected by gas poisoning or burns. Logically, a child lost in such an environment should have been delirious or comatose. As Kaelen scooped her up and rushed her out, he noticed something strange. Though the fissure lay directly beside a venting chimney, the air immediately surrounding the girl was perfectly still, and on the damp rock surface, Kaelen briefly smelled an aroma that was neither geological nor biological. The distinct scent of old black gunpowder and rotting leather, mixed with heavy tobacco smoke. It was a smell evocative of century-old coal mines, utterly alien to the current sulfur and damp stone. Safely back at the temporary base, Alara began recounting her story through shivers. She didn't cry in fear but seemed slightly bewildered. She said that when she started coughing and felt dizzy, an old, bearded man wearing a ragged miner's coat found her. "He didn't talk much, Uncle Kaelen," Alara said, "but his eyes glowed like hot embers in the dark. He just pointed to that crack and told me to stay still. I was scared, but he brought this strange warmth." Kaelen felt no skepticism. He had seen the Troglodyte hunt, had seen the Bone Stripper tear flesh, so why couldn't he believe in a benevolent ghost? Alara's description perfectly matched the local legend of Elias Dagger, the man killed in the gas blast whose spirit was believed to be tethered to the old mine sector, searching for lost children to atone for his failure to save his son. Dagger was not a creature of the cave. He was a tragic relic turned unseen protector. Kaelen realized Dagger hadn't just found Alara. He had guided her to a near-perfect geological location to avoid the toxins, knowledge only a lifelong, though deceased, miner could possess. This event broadened Kaelen's theory of survival. He recognized that the Onyx Abyss was not just a system of prey and predator, It was a complex ecology of entities, including protective spirits. If Kaelen had to learn to respect the bone stripper to avoid being shredded, he also had to learn how to show gratitude to Old Man Dagger to ensure others would be protected. This was when Kaelen established the Bourbon Pact. The ritual was entirely private and personal. Every time Kaelen had to enter the gas-infested old mine sector or the proximity of the Wailing Hot Springs, he carried 2 items: a bottle of the finest quality bourbon, usually an expensive label he knew Dagger could never have afforded while alive, and an unopened pack of heavy cigarettes. He would place these items at the old entrance to the shaft where Dagger perished. He would turn on his lamp, carefully set the bottle on a flat rock, and step back. He spoke no words. It was a silent offering, a payment for the grace shown in saving Alara and all the others Dagger had silently guarded over the decades. "It's not superstition," Kaelen explained to Jonas, who had fully recovered after the Troglodyte incident. Once, when Jonas asked about the strange habit, "It's respect. Onyx has its own laws. Some entities want to kill you because it is their instinct. Others want to help you because it is their tragedy. If I have to fight the Troglodyte, I also have to pay Dagger. I refuse to be indebted to the Abyss." This act, for Kaelen, was the final acceptance that science and data were finite, but intuition and respect for the unseen were infinite. Old Man Dagger was not a subject for study. He was a colleague on a different plane. The Bourbon Pact cemented Kaelen's belief that to survive the Onyx Abyss, one had to accept the existence of both angels and demons, provided they all operated under the fundamental laws of the dark. These horrific and supernatural experiences did not make Kaelen quit. On the contrary, they honed him into an indispensable expert. His handling of the Troglodyte threat, his deadly respect for the bone stripper, and his pragmatic acceptance of Dagger proved Kaelen was the only person capable of making the hardest decisions. Kaelen Vance was promoted to senior field consultant, a position requiring him to decide when to sacrifice scientific data, when to permanently seal a corridor, and when to heed the stories of invisible friends for the sake of safety. He accepted the office along with the truth that the subterranean world could not be explained by any textbook. For Kaelen, every day was a battle against the dark, against madness, and against primal life forms. But the greatest reward after those hours of conflict was not a paycheck or praise. It was the moment he crawled out of the cave mouth, his headlamp extinguished, and gazed up at the night sky. After being submerged in absolute darkness, the Milky Way blazed into view, a cold, vast, yet brilliant reminder that even though the Onyx Abyss was hell, an enormous universe still waited above ground. Kaelen Vance was more than an explorer. He was a philosopher of the dark. His childhood was not spent in gentle campsites, but in grueling hours within abandoned mines alongside his strict father, where he learned that the Earth's crust was not inert matter, but a patient predator. Now, at 27, he dedicated his life to the Onyx Abyss, a vast, intricate karst system, privately owned and completely isolated from government oversight. This place was a constantly breathing labyrinth where rockfalls, poison gas leaks, and seismic shifts occurred without warning. Kaelen undertook guiding, mapping, and rescue missions in the most dangerous zones, asserting that every geological theory he had learned became meaningless when confronted with the strange and primordial realities that existed deep below. The Onyx Abyss contained not only minerals, but bio-supernatural secrets buried since the world was young. For Kaelen, the most crucial tool was not a seismic scanner, but sheer intuition, because in the perpetual dark, the enemy could be anything, from a simple pressure change to a life form utterly unknown to science. In 2009, during a routine mapping assignment in a newly discovered corridor, the Onyx Abyss taught Kaelen his first lesson about prioritizing survival over science. A violent rockfall had buried and trapped his partner, Jonas, deep within a gas pocket. Unable to rescue Jonas from the initial direction, Kaelen was forced to crawl through a narrow, wet fissure that led into a deeper, uncharted sector. Here, he noticed a damp, slick trace on the stone floor, leading him to a larger chamber where the air was thick with the scent of raw meat and blood. It was here he encountered the Troglodyte. The creature stood nearly 2 handspans taller than Kaelen, horrifyingly emaciated. Its skin chalk-white as if it had never seen light, and most terrifyingly, its pupil-less, blood-red eyes reflected Kaelen's headlamp. It was dragging the carcass of a mountain goat, recently caught from the surface. When Kaelen shone his light, the Troglodyte did not flee. It stopped, turned slowly, and challenged him with a throaty, rasping roar. Kaelen understood he faced an apex subterranean predator. To ensure Jonas's safety and eliminate this threat from frequently traveled corridors, Kaelen made a brutal decision. He activated a small amount of the C4 explosive he carried. The blast not only created a temporary escape route for Jonas, but also permanently collapsed and sealed the entryway to the Troglodyte's domain. He sacrificed countless amounts of valuable geological data simply to eliminate a biological threat, an act that the scientific community would call vandalism, but which Kaelen knew was survival. If the Troglodyte was the horror of the visible, the bone stripper was the horror of the sophisticated. This event occurred during Kaelen's internship, when his team was compelled to cross a fast-flowing, bone-chilling cold underground river, under the direction of Silas, an arrogant guide who dismissed the environment's inherent dangers. Silas insisted they cross the whirlpool section to save time. As Silas waded halfway through the strongest current, he suddenly stopped. Instead of a cry of cold, he emitted a terrifying, utterly inhuman shriek before an invisible force yanked him violently underwater. Kaelen's panicked team struggled for several minutes to pull Silas onto a small sandy bank. The sight that met them was etched into Kaelen's psyche forever. Silas's feet and lower shins were completely gone. The skin, muscle, tendons, and even the thick padding of his specialized boots had been excised perfectly, sharp-edged as if not by teeth or sharp stone, but by an instantaneous ultrasurgical blade. Only the clean, white tibia bones remained. Silas died from shock and blood loss moments later. Kaelen later dubbed the entity the Bone Stripper, a chillingly efficient, super-fast aquatic predator. This incident forced Kaelen to always respect the subterranean water, not merely as a geological obstacle, but as a living entity, a cold and effective hunter. Not every supernatural occurrence in the Onyx Abyss brought horror. This truth was proven during a high-pressure rescue mission when Kaelen had to search for Alara, the daughter of an influential donor, who was lost near an unstable geothermal hot spring, an area prone to collapse and toxic gas leaks. Kaelen found the girl huddled in a small fissure, shivering from hypothermia but strangely alert. Alara recounted that an ancient, scraggly bearded man in a threadbare coat with eyes like burning charcoal had found her and pointed her toward the safe spot. Kaelen immediately recognized the description. It was Old Man Dagger, a former mine foreman who had died decades earlier trying to rescue his son from a gas-related shaft collapse. Dagger was not a cave entity. He was a ghost known to protect lost individuals in the dangerous old mining zones, always carrying the faint scent of sulfur and old dynamite. Kaelen, who had already accepted the existence of the Troglodyte and the Bone Stripper, easily accepted Dagger's reality. Dagger's intervention allowed Kaelen to successfully rescue Alara without needing to risk the potentially collapsing area. In return for this favor, Kaelen established a ritual. Whenever he worked near the collapsed mine shaft, he routinely left an expensive bottle of bourbon and a pack of heavy tobacco nearby. It was an unspoken pact, a mark of respect for the invisible rules of the Onyx Abyss. These terrifying and supernatural experiences did not deter Kaelen. On the contrary, they honed him into an indispensable expert. his handling of the Troglodyte threat, his deadly respect for the Bone Stripper, and his acceptance of Dagger proved Kaelen was the only person capable of making the hardest decisions. Kaelen Vance was promoted to senior field consultant for the Onyx Corporation, a position that demanded he decide when to sacrifice scientific data, when to permanently seal a corridor, and when to heed the stories of invisible friends to ensure safety. The promotion did not come with a mahogany desk or glamorous studio lighting. It was the transference of a severe ethical and scientific burden. The private company leadership, focused on profits from rare minerals, had recognized a painful truth. The corridors Kaelen sealed were the corridors where no one died. He became the gatekeeper of the abyss, the one who passed judgment. Kaelen was tasked with drafting what he called the Doctrine of Vague Threat, a set of internal guidelines completely contrary to standard safety protocols. He taught new teams not with geology textbooks, but with horror stories. He stressed that the greatest danger was not measurable pressure or atmospheric change, but unusual silence. If your equipment says everything is fine, but your gut says something is lurking, trust your gut. Kaelen often instructed. His voice is deep as a subterranean echo. We are not dealing only with rock and gas. We are dealing with primordial life forms, predators that existed before man knew fire. The Troglodyte cannot be detected by a thermal gauge. The Bone Stripper leaves no carbon trace. Our job is to stay away from what we cannot understand, not to try and classify it. In his new role, Kaelen ordered the permanent sealing of nearly 30% of newly discovered corridors within 2 years. These shafts might have led to chambers containing millions in rare minerals, but he had found signs that defied explanation. A pattern of scratch marks on the stone inconsistent with natural erosion, or a cold metallic scent with no clear chemical source. To geologists trained at top universities, Kaelen's actions were gross sabotage. To him, they were necessary precaution. Every time he signed the order to pour concrete or detonate explosives to collapse a passage, he felt the weight of his isolation. He was the only one who held the full picture of the biological and supernatural threats below. His burden was living with the knowledge he had sacrificed. Scientists pursued perfection. Kaelen pursued survival. After the Bone Stripper incident and Silas's death, Kaelen no longer viewed underground water as a resource. He saw it as a fragile membrane separating them from an invisible, superfast horror. He enacted rigorous regulations on crossing subterranean rivers, often spending hours or even days seeking drier, safer routes. When questioned by office managers about the delays, Kaelen simply replied, "I will never risk a man's lower leg to save an hour of work." His acceptance of Old Man Dagger also became part of his risk management strategy. When an old mine area was scheduled for re-excavation, Kaelen didn't just check the collapse schematics. He visited the area alone. If he smelled a faint wisp of sulfur or felt a strange warmth in the cold air, he knew Dagger was present. He would complete the ritual, placing the bottle of bourbon and the tobacco pack in a designated rock niche. This was not empty superstition. It was respect for an entity that, for whatever reason, chose to protect the lost. Kaelen's ability to treat a ghost with the same practical respect he treated a collapsing mine made him invaluable to the company and a heretic to the outside world. He accepted the position along with the truth that the world below could not be explained by any textbook. For Kaelen, every day was a fight against darkness, madness, and primeval life forms. He was humanity's silent vanguard against the ancient secrets of the earth, a role he had to carry in utter solitude. After hours of fighting within the bowels of the earth, where light was only a flickering artificial yellow against absolute shadow, Kaelen's greatest reward was not a paycheck or praise, but the ritual of returning to the surface. As he crawled out of the cave mouth, often after 12 to 16 hours without rest, he performed a simple action. He extinguished his blinking headlamp. The visual change was a profound electric shock. In the onyx, darkness was matter, it was the enemy, it was a palpable presence. It was darkness that carried the smell of damp clay, toxic gas, and raw blood. It was a small, confined environment where every mistake was instantly punished. But when Kaelen turned off his light and looked up, he was bathed in an entirely different kind of darkness. Cosmic dark. The night sky, typically unpolluted by light in this remote region, opened up in its infinite expanse. The Milky Way appeared in brilliant clarity, a cold, silver-white river of light running across an endless velvet black canvas. For Kaelen, this moment was healing. It was a reminder that while the Onyx Abyss was a focused hell, there was still a vast, cold, but passive universe waiting above ground. The stars did not lurk, they did not hunt, they did not care. The grand indifference of the cosmos was a massive comfort. After dealing with the intentional hostility of the Troglodyte or the Bone Stripper, the pure apathy of the galaxies was a release. Kaelen would stand there, breathing the cold night air, the scent of pine and dew replacing sulfur and C4. He would often retrieve a second bottle of bourbon, definitely not meant for Dagger, and take a sip, feeling the harsh burn tear down his throat. He never stayed on the surface too long. This peace was only a palliative, but it was enough to reset his internal balance. As he gazed into the ancient constellations, he understood his place. A surface creature forced to work in the dark to protect the light. He could never escape the abyss, but he could learn to balance it with the immensity of the cosmos. With every contemplation of the Milky Way, Kaelen reaffirmed his resolve. He would continue to descend, armed with his brutal philosophy of survival, to ensure that others too would have the chance to stand beneath these stars.